In the vast and dangerous borders of the Roman Empire, survival depended on an almost invisible, yet impenetrable line of defense: the Limes. A network of strategically positioned forts, connected by fast roads, ensured that Rome could respond to external threats with surprising speed. But how exactly did these forts protect the empire? And what was the secret behind this military structure that kept the legions one step ahead of their enemies? Today, you'll discover how the Roman Limes not only defended the borders, but also served as a communication system that shaped Rome's military strategy. The story behind this network is more impressive than it seems, and its importance was vital for the security of the empire. From the early days of the Roman Empire, territorial expansion was seen as a strategic priority. However, as the borders grew, a new challenge emerged: protecting the limits against barbarian invasions and local uprisings. The Limes arose in response to this need. Originally, the term Limes referred to any path or boundary road, but over time it came to describe the fortified barriers built along the borders. These structures became essential for maintaining control over vast regions and ensuring that the empire's borders were well defended. The history of the Limes thus begins with the effort to stabilize the frontiers and create an efficient defensive system. The first major implementation of the Limes occurred during the reign of Emperor Augustus, when the empire faced increasing pressures in the Germania and Danube regions. It was not just about walls or fences. The Limes involved a complex network of forts, watchtowers, military camps, and mobile patrols. This allowed Rome to constantly monitor enemy movements and prepare for rapid defense. Each fort played a vital role within this system, serving as an observation point and support for the legions. The effectiveness of the Limes relied largely on its ability to respond quickly to threats. The first forts built along the Limes were small outposts, strategically positioned on high points that offered visibility over vulnerable areas. Gradually, these small forts evolved into larger, more robust structures capable of housing hundreds of soldiers. The garrisons were always prepared for quick mobilizations, whether to reinforce other forts, intercept invaders, or provide valuable information about enemy movements. It was a system that, despite its apparent simplicity, required impressive organization and logistics. Every positioning decision was calculated, ensuring that the Limes was a true barrier of protection. However, the Limes was not just a static line. It evolved as threats increased or changed location. In practice, the system of forts and roads allowed Rome to be flexible in its defense, quickly adapting to the terrain conditions and enemy tactics. When necessary, temporary forts were established to cover specific areas during periods of greater instability. The flexibility of the Limes was undoubtedly one of the factors that ensured its longevity and success. It reflected Roman military intelligence, always willing to adjust its strategies to maximize efficiency in protecting its borders. While the Limes was crucial in defending the frontiers, it also held an important symbolic role. It represented the boundary between Roman civilization and the barbarian world beyond its borders. Keeping the Limes intact was a way to reaffirm Roman superiority and its ability to control vast and diverse territories. The forts, in addition to functioning as strategic defense points, also served as centers for the Romanization of local populations, gradually integrating cultures under Roman rule. This made the Limes not only a military barrier, but also an instrument of cultural expansion. The forts of the Limes were not just military constructions. They served as the eyes and ears of the empire in the border regions. Each fort, with its sturdy walls and watchtowers, was positioned in locations that maximized visibility and control over vast areas. The soldiers stationed there were not only prepared for potential combat, but also gathered valuable information about the movements of nearby barbarian tribes. This intelligence network allowed Rome to maintain constant and strategic surveillance over potential invaders, taking preventive action when necessary. The presence of forts along the Limes also created a sense of security for the inhabitants of the Roman provinces. They were the first line of defense against any external threat, meaning civilians could continue their lives relatively protected. Additionally, The forts were self-sufficient in many aspects, housing not only soldiers but also supply warehouses, workshops, and in some cases small civilian communities that lived around them. This reinforced the Roman presence at the borders, showing that Rome was committed to protecting every inch of its lands. The forts were interconnected by a highly efficient communication network. Observation towers located between the forts allowed for quick signaling in case of emergencies, alerting distant garrisons within minutes. This visual communication network was essential, as it enabled coordinated and immediate responses to any threat. Messages could be transmitted from one fort to another using smoke signals, lights, or flags, depending on the time of day and weather conditions. This rapid alert system ensured that even in the most distant points of the empire, soldiers could react in time. Additionally, the forts served as logistical centers, where supplies, weapons, and reinforcements were stored and redistributed as needed. During periods of conflict, the garrisons of the forts could be quickly reinforced by mobile legions, ensuring that the borders remained well protected. The role of the forts was so central that in many cases, they became launching points for reconquest campaigns or preemptive strikes, demonstrating that the function of these structures extended far beyond simple defense. They were the beating heart of the Roman military presence along the Limes. Each fort was a microcosm of the empire, reflecting the discipline, organization, and strength of Rome. The garrisons were made up of highly trained soldiers, many of whom spent years, if not decades, stationed in one location. This allowed them to become familiar with the terrain, local tribes, and the most effective combat tactics for that specific region. Furthermore, life within the forts followed a strict rhythm of training, maintenance, and vigilance, ensuring that the soldiers were always ready for combat. The trust placed in these men was complete, as the security of the empire largely depended on their readiness. The Roman roads, connecting the forts along the Limes, were one of the main pillars of the empire's military efficiency. These roads were not just routes for troop movements. They were meticulously planned to ensure that messages, supplies, and reinforcements arrived quickly to the areas in need. Built with impressive precision, the roads allowed armies to move rapidly across hundreds of miles, ensuring that Rome was always one step ahead of its enemies. Controlling these roads was just as important as controlling the forts themselves. In addition to troop mobility, the roads facilitated communication between the different garrisons along the borders. While visual signals were the most immediate method of communication, the roads allowed messengers to deliver detailed orders directly from the central command in Rome to the most distant outposts. These messages could include strategic instructions, mobilization plans, or even reports on the situation at the borders. The speed at which this information was transmitted and responded to was crucial for the success of military operations. The roads were the backbone of a complex and well-structured communication system. The construction of these roads followed the famous Roman engineering standard: layers of compacted stones, efficient drainage, and a surface durable enough for long periods of use. Each road had a clear purpose and a well-defined destination, often following natural routes like rivers or plains. But what's most fascinating is that these roads, besides serving military purposes, also facilitated trade and civilian movement. Many cities that grew along the Roman borders emerged directly from the proximity to these roads, attracting merchants and settlers in search of safety and opportunities. The roads also played a decisive role during offensive military campaigns. When Rome decided to launch a preemptive strike against barbarian tribes beyond its borders, the legions could move with unmatched speed. These paths, carefully maintained by Roman authorities, allowed the troops to keep a steady pace, while their enemies were often forced to traverse rugged and difficult terrain. The logistical advantage these roads provided translated directly into strategic victories for the empire. They were, without a doubt, a fundamental tool in the Roman military arsenal. The importance of the roads goes beyond their immediate impact on military campaigns and communication. They represented the physical and permanent presence of Rome in distant territories. With every mile covered, the impression of Roman order and control solidified. This created a sense of continuity that despite the distance from the central cities, the power of the empire was always present and accessible. The roads, therefore, were not just transport routes. They were symbols of power, integration, and authority, connecting the center of the empire to its farthest reaches with calculated precision. Among the various frontiers of the Roman Empire, the Limes Germanicus and the Limes Danubianus stood out for their complexity and strategic importance. The Limes Germanicus, which stretched along Upper Germania, had the monumental task of containing the Germanic tribes, known for their organization and aggression. Meanwhile, the Limes Danubianus, running along the Danube River, protected the eastern frontier and faced equally complex challenges, such as invasions by the Dacians and Sarmatians. These two limes became symbols of how Rome dealt with different threats using the same flexible structure of forts and roads. The Limes Germanicus was made up of a network of forts that extended from the Rhine to the Danube, covering vast forests and mountains. The Roman presence in these areas served as a constant reminder that even in hard-to-reach regions, the empire was there. In addition to the forts, observation towers were essential in this limes, providing views over vast stretches of enemy territory. The Germanic tribes, who knew the terrain well, posed a constant threat, and the Romans understood that any sign of weakness could be exploited. The response was a strong and coordinated defense, with the capability to react quickly to any incursions. The Limes Danubianus, with the Danube River as its main natural barrier, had unique characteristics. The river served both as protection and as a transportation route, allowing the Romans to move troops and supplies quickly. Along its banks, a series of forts were built to control crossings and ensure that enemies could not easily enter Roman territory. These forts were true river fortresses prepared to withstand sieges and with garrisons specialized in naval warfare. The combination of land and naval forces made the Limes Danubianus a robust defense against invaders coming from the east. These two limes also demonstrated Rome's ability to adapt its strategy to different geographies and types of enemies. In the case of the Limes Germanicus, the Romans had to deal with surprise attacks in dense forests and mountainous terrain, while the challenge at the Limes Danubianus was to control river routes and combat enemies who often used the river as a means of invasion. Both systems, despite their differences, followed the same principle: a line of defense articulated around forts, roads, and efficient communication. This adaptability was one of the reasons for the lasting success of Roman defense over the centuries. Although the Limes Germanicus and the Limes Danubianus were effective for long periods, they also highlighted the limitations of the empire in the face of rising enemies. The Germanic tribes and the peoples of the Eastern European steppes became more organized and numerous over time. Eventually, the effort required to maintain these frontiers became a burden, both financially and militarily. Nonetheless, the resilience of the limes over the centuries proves how committed Rome was to protecting its lands and expanding its influence to the farthest reaches of its territory.